بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد قائد الغر الميامين وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا وهدينا وكل ما كان خيرا لنا في الدنيا والدين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Kanz al-Daqa'iq, which is level 3 in the Islamic studies curriculum in Hanafi fiqh, we're looking in this particular course at transactions, starting with the fiqh of sales. And just to recap lesson 1 briefly, we saw in lesson 1 some of the key concepts related to transactions, right? So we saw some of the key concepts related to transactions, and in that we began by looking at what is some of what has come in the Quran regarding transactions, and we'll see today the significance of this with when non-definition arises, right? That do not consume each other's wealth in wrongful ways, rather let it be through trade on the basis of established mutual agreement. And then we touched upon some of the key concepts related to the sales transaction between the offer. What is a contract? It requiring two transacting parties. We need to be clear and be able to define what is the offer, what is acceptance, the integral of the sale, right? To look at, we touched a little bit on the conditions for validity, the conditions of soundness, right? And inshallah, we'll get you the handout that we've promised related to this, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. It's very important also to appreciate that the subject of the sale is the item of sale, right? That is the heart of the sale. This needs to be known in terms of what category of what item it is and the distinguishing qualities, right? The details, if not defined, could corrupt the sale. If undefined in essence, the sale is invalid, batil. The invalid sale did not take place. There is no exchange of property, even if there's no exchange of ownership, even if the item was exchanged, right? And there's details related to that. Those are coming again. If undefined in details, the sale would be corrupt, voidable, meaning both parties have the right and responsibility to cancel the sale, but they can come to mutual agreement and correct the sale even after the fact, right? So the invalid sale did not take place. The corrupt sale counts, but it's voidable. Both parties have the moral responsibility to do one of two things: to either cancel it, and either party can cancel it, and they have the full right to cancel it. The other party cannot refuse the cancellation of a bay' fasid. So both have the right and responsibility to either cancel it, and either party can cancel it, or they can, by mutual agreement, rectify it. So for example, if they say, I'll sell you a sofa, Right? I'll sell you an armchair for $50. And and let's say in that land there are all kinds of armchairs. So the item is known, it's an armchair, but the distinguishing qualities aren't sufficiently known. This is a corrupt sale. Even when it's delivered, now they can validate that sale, but by mutual agreement, both have the right of cancellation. But corrupt sales are sinful and they have the meaning of riba. Right? And the price is the thaman. The thaman, which is what the two parties agree to, is a means in the transaction. If unspecified, the sale is corrupt, it's voidable. And this is one of the common mistakes people make. In a rush, they'll say, yeah, we'll agree later. Sinful. Okay, so that's just a quick recap for the purpose of jogging our memories of some of the main things we took in the previous lesson. Now, today, we're going to begin, by leave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at looking at what if there's difference, right? With respect to the item of sale and some basic cases of non-definition, right? So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, so Imam Hafiz al-Din wal-Millah al-Nasafi, rahimahullah ta'ala, wa nafa'na bihi wa bikum, says, وَمَنْ بَاعَ صُبْرَةً كُلَّ صَاعٍ بِدِرْهَمْ صَحَّ فِي صَاعٍ. Right? Whoever sells a pile of food, a subra, such that each measure is for a dirham, this is valid in one measure only. So let's just look at the issue. The subra, right, is al-majmu' min al-ta'am, right? It's a pile of food, right? 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 So let's say that that some Afghani person started a mantu business. So they call it mantu madness. But you have to be careful because names can color realities, right? So what happens that mantu auntie, things are going out of control. So Sister Sadia goes, she wants to buy some mantu for the family. So on this tray, there's a whole pile of mantu. She says, I'd like to buy that. Each piece for this much. Or let's say someone says, start selling grain. So there's a pile of grain, right? Pile of rice, basmati rice. There's a pile of rice. Said, how much is this? Said, it is $1 a kilo. Okay, I'll buy the whole thing. What's the problem with saying, I'll buy the whole thing?
I don't know exactly how much food is.
Yeah, so you don't know the amount of the item of sale. So So if you don't know the amount of the item of sale, what else don't you know?
The price.
You don't know the price, right? You don't know the price. So so this could lead to dispute, right? This could lead to dispute. So here what's mentioned in the text is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, right? That was the item of sale. So let's say it's rice, right? Of anything whose units don't differ in quality, they don't differ in value, right? Because we don't, in value, it's غير متفاوت, right? طعام is غير متفاوت. Its units are non-variable in their value, in their qima. So because we said, I'll buy this pile of rice, each kilo for $1, we don't know the total amount and we don't know the total price. So this non-definition could lead to disputes. A person, I didn't realize it was 25 kilos. What kind of rice is this? Okay? It's too expensive, so it could lead to dispute. But what is known is the 1 kilo, right? Right? So it is valid in the 1 kilo only, right? In the صح في صاع, and here, very important, مع الخيار للمشتري. The buyer has the option of cancellation. Why? Why? Why would the buyer have the option of cancellation? This is called, right? So the option to cancel, this is called khiyar, right? The khiyar, right? Khiyar here does not mean just choice in general, right? Khiyar refers to the option of cancellation, right? The option, the choice to cancel, right? The choice to cancel. Now, why? The buyer wanted this pile of rice. So the seller said, I sell it to you each kilo for $1. Then and the buyer says, I accept. Faqih is standing there. So Sister Sadia says, folks, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, this is only valid in 1 kilo. Why does the buyer have the option of cancellation? Anyone? Why would the buyer have the option of canceling? Anyone?
Exact amount can be less or more than what the buyer presents.
No. Why is it like when we say that's only valid in 1 kilo? Why does the buyer have the option of canceling there?
You specified only for that 1 kilo, or
Yeah, but why? Like, okay, you tried, the person tried to buy a pile of rice, but you tell her that it's only valid in 1 kilo. Why would the person here have the option of canceling?
the unknown of the whole pile?
No. It is valid in 1 kilo, right? So the pile, buying the pile on the basis of that each kilo is $1. The sale is corrupt for the whole thing, but it is valid according to Abu Hanifa just for 1 kilo. But the buyer, with respect to the 1 kilo, which is valid, has the option of cancellation. مع الخيار للمشتري, with the option of canceling. Why? Just think practically. Okay? Now, you wouldn't do something like that, but let's say you went to buy rice for a family gathering. So you said, Auntie, sell me this. How much is it? $1 a kilo. I'll take the whole thing. Then you realize, oh my God, it's only valid in 1 kilo. The auntie says, Astaghfirullah. Let's say pious auntie, Astaghfirullah. What did you make me do? I will not deal with you because you made me enter into haram transaction. Says, I'll only give you that 1 kilo. Now, you're cooking for a party. Why would you want to have the option of canceling?
You need it in bulk?
Yeah, what are you going to do with 1 kilo, right? Right? And you wanted a good amount of rice, right? You wanted a good amount of rice. You only got 1 kilo. This is called لِتَفَرُّقِ الصَّفْقَةِ, right? That what you tried to purchase was not completed, right? تَفَرُّقِ الصَّفْقَةِ. The safqa is the agreed upon thing was broken up. You didn't get what you were asking for. Now, you may be fine with it. Say, you know what? Maybe maybe forget about inviting all those neighbors. I'll just cook for the family. It's hard work anyways, and whatever. So, yeah. So you have the option there of canceling. This is all according to Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa, in these issues, is very cautious. Why? Because any non-definition that could lead to dispute corrupts the transaction. We'll see in a moment, there's ikhtilaf about this. But food, like a food, and the default of food is its grains. Let's say rice, wheat, flour, things that don't differ in their units. The value of each unit is the same. So here, important point is that it's valid in 1 measure, but the buyer, the mushtari, has the option of cancellation because they may not be satisfied with it. This is not what they agreed to. But then he says, وَلَوْ بَاعَ ثَلَّةً أَوْ ثَوْبًا كُلَّ شاة أو ذراع بدرهم فسد في الكل. If one sells a flock, the ثلة is قطعة من الغنم, right? The ثلة, and it's with a fatha and a shadda. It's قطيع غنم. It is a flock of sheep. Right? It's a flock of sheep. Now, what's the difference between a flock of sheep and here thawb? Right? Thawb is a tricky word, right? Because thawb in Arabic refers at a simple level to one of three things. Thawb can refer to an item of clothing. An item of clothing, right? And an item of clothing, each item is unique. Now, typically, that's sold by unit, right? That's one usage of thawb. Another usage of thawb is thawb can refer to cloth, right? Cloth. But cloth, right? And you have to think in pre-industrial times. Cloth, each piece of cloth that was weaved together would be the default of cloth in the assumption of the fuqaha is that thawb is mutafawit, right? It is a unique piece of cloth, right? It is a unique piece of cloth, and it's and it's not divisible, right? Because it'd be a unique piece, and each piece would be variable. That's why Ibn Abdin mentions thawb ay yadurruhu at-tab'id, right? That if you were to cut it, it would be harmed, right? Frequently, people would make, for example, let's say that Sister Yusr wants to get some clothing made. So she would commission someone to prepare the cloth, right? To actually weave the cloth. So that would be called a thawb. But that was weaved keeping in mind what would be cut into. So that kind of thing, that kind of cloth, that's why I translated thawb here as unique cloth, right? Unique cloth, right? The other type of cloth is like, what we have, where you have rolls of cloth, right? Right? Rolls of cloth. That would be like the issue of the food, because each unit of a roll of cloth is of a standard price, as opposed to, if you imagine, that has varying value, right? So cloth can be of three types. Units, an item of dress, right? That's each unit has a distinct value, right? Because you couldn't sell the sleeve of a piece of cloth, right? Because that is considered one unit. Then you have a piece of cloth that is unique. That's hard to find in our times. Or rolls of cloth that is sold by the measure, right? So here it's talking about if one sells a flock of sheep or unique cloth, i.e. yadurruhu at-tab'id, which if you cut would be harmed, on the condition that each sheep or each cubit, the cubit is a dhira, is a measure of fingertip to elbow, right? About 48 to 50 centimeters. Then this is fully corrupt. Why? Why would it be corrupt? Will be fasid even in the single unit. Didn't we say each sheep is for, let's say, $100? So let's say my friend Usman decides to go and he says, Yeah, mashallah, I got a major promotion. I'm going to cook mensef for the whole neighborhood. So he goes, finds a small flock of sheep, say, we'll slaughter 6 of these, and the rest we'll keep for future feasts. So he goes to the farmer, that, my brother Zafar, how much would you sell me this flock of sheep? He says, I'll sell you the whole flock, and it's in a pen, right? It's an enclosed space. So I'll sell you this flock of sheep, each sheep for $100. Now, didn't we specify the unit here? Then why isn't it valid?
Because each unit may be different from the other.
Why do we care?
It can lead to fighting or argumentation.
But more important than it being different is, right, the difference that counts is, this is anything whose units differ in its qima, in its value, right? Because who cares if this sheep is cute and this sheep is ugly? Although that's resolvable in court. What really matters is that if some sheep will be heavier, some will be lighter, right? So the individual units differ in their qima, in their value, right? So it's corrupt in all of them, in itself, right? Well, however, he says, وَلَوْ سُمِّيَ الْكُلْ صَحَّ فِي الْكُلْ, right? And if the whole, if the total is mentioned, then i.e. within the majlis, then the whole amount becomes valid if they agree to it, right? So what's the scenario? Someone goes, says, okay, auntie, I'd like to buy this pile of, this beautiful pile of premium basmati rice. How much is it? Says each kilo is for $1. Really? Wow, excellent. I'll buy the whole thing. She says accept. Offer an acceptance. This is corrupt. Initially only valid for one. She says, let me weigh it for you. So weighs it, says it's 25 kilos. If they agree, it becomes valid in the whole thing, right? If the whole amount is mentioned afterwards and they agree to it, it will be valid. And this applies, but the more correct opinion is it becomes valid through the non-verbal agreement afterwards, right? So initially, it was a corrupt sale, but then they corrected it after through the non-verbal. It's 25 kilos. Okay, so here's $25, right? That non-verbal offer and acceptance, or the verbal offer and acceptance, would be a correction of the original contract. And this applies to both scenarios before, right? So here there's a number of vocabulary items that you should keep in mind that are in the text. Right? So the key thing to appreciate is food. Here, each unit is known. This is called the غير متفاوت, right? Things that don't differ, i.e., and the غير المتفاوت is غير المتفاوت في القيمة. The things that don't vary in their unit value, right? The unit market value. As for the other things, right, the unique cloth or the sheep, this is considered to be things whose unit value differs. This is called the mutafawit. Right? This is considered the mutafawit. Right? 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 And the tafawut, the variance, is not in its look, size, or shape, but rather in the market value. Because, for example, let's say that the market practice in a particular land is they sell melons by unit. Let's say they have a type of melon that doesn't vary in its units much, a slight variance. Or eggs. If you are nerdy enough to stare at your eggs, are they all the same size? But how are eggs sold? Eggs, assuming of a similar grade, how are they sold? By number, right? And imagine if you went to like a farmer's market or something and they're selling really premium eggs. You say, you know, one for each egg is, let's say some premium, some rare bird egg or whatever. Each egg is $2, $20 for a dozen, right? Now, if you got 4 eggs, it would be $2 times 4, even if the individual eggs in the same category are slightly different. So this would be considered to be غير متفاوت, right? Because the variance is considered in the unit value of each one. Okay. So now here, this is very easy to understand if you look at this diagram, right? That if you sell without mentioning the full amount, there's 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, non-variable items, and what do we mean by non-variable? It is not variable in the unit market value, right? Even if they differ slightly in characteristic, like eggs, for example. Can people think of other things whose units differ, but they're sold by number? Anyone? Any thoughts? Flowers. Let's say, let's say roses. Right? Someone sells roses, and let's say it's the urf, it's the established custom in the land that roses are sold by unit. Each rose for $4, whatever the price is, right? Whenever my wife's annoyed with me, she gets herself a gift. So Jazakallah khair, you got me a gift. I'll have to ask that, what happened? So, such and such. She won't mention. If I insist, she'll tell me what annoyed her, but she won't complain. She'll just get herself a gift. So it makes her more happy than, anyways. Of course, if you decide to implement that, it should be bitaradi. It should be by mutual agreement, right? So don't get yourselves in trouble. So, according to Abu Hanifa, in non-variable items, you mentioned the unit price, but the total is not known. Only one is known, it's only valid in one, but there's an option of cancellation. But if the unit is mentioned of a group of things whose amount we don't know, the flock of sheep, the unique cloth, right? Or other things that vary in unit value according to their unit, in their quality. According to Abu Hanifa, it's not valid in even the one, because the one would differ. Even though we mentioned the price for it, because the buyer would want to give the thing of least value, the smallest sheep, and the seller would want the biggest sheep. So it would lead to dispute. And now, this is the position of Abu Hanifa on both issues, right? And it's the more precautious. However, this is not the fatwa position. The Sahibain, the two companions of Abu Hanifa, disagreed on this point. Just one second. So sorry. So the Sahibain said that in both cases, so the Sahibain, Abu Yusuf and Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, said that this is valid in both scenarios. Why? For two reasons. One is urf, one is custom, that traders and others frequently deal with these kinds of things. Right? So the traders frequently deal with this kind of thing, right? So there's non-definition. But this non-definition is controlled. Why? Because it is a defined pile of food, right? You're not saying, sell me whatever is in your oven. Right? Someone says, I'm making brownies. Say, I'll buy all the, sell me the muffins. I'm making chocolate brownies, chocolate muffins. So how much are they? Each muffin is $2. They say, I'll buy all the muffins in the oven, and you can't see in the oven. So we don't have even a general sense of the amount. Or I'll buy all the apples under the table, and we don't know how much is under the table, right? But here it's a defined amount, but we don't know its extent. Right? So though there is a non-definition, this non-definition, had they wanted to lift it, it was within their scope to lift it. And it's effectively known, right? And the dispute would not be reasonable. Why? The sheep are all in one enclosed space. It's not all the sheep in the fields. And we don't know, it's a restricted non-definition, right? It's a jahala that's within their ready capacity. You could just stop, measure it right there, right? That's number one. But it's supported by the fact that this is customarily done. So the definition, the jahala, the non-definition is restricted, number one. Number two, so it was within their ready capacity to have lifted it. But that is supported by the fact that there's ta'amul, right? People, especially traders, engage in this consistently. And it does not lead to dispute. Right? So here, the legally, in itself, stronger position is Abu Hanifa's. Non-definition can lead to dispute, can affect mutual agreement, corrupts the transaction. That is legally rigorous. That is the mu'tamad. But the fatwa position, in applying that, you see that yes, it can lead to dispute. There's non-definition, it can lead to dispute, but the non-definition is limited because the item's right there, right? Right, the item's right there. So the non-definition is restricted. It could lead to dispute. They say, تعامل الناس رافع للنزاع. People's customary practice lifts dispute, right? And this is common. Let's say that Mantu auntie who runs Mantu Madness urgently needs, what's a key ingredient for Mantu? Yeah, say ground beef, right? Ground beef. So Mantu auntie is running late, right? So she goes to the butcher next door. Uncle Khan said, Khan Sahab, I need some meat urgently. He said, I just ground some beef. So how much is it? He says, it's 225 or whatever, 525 a kilo. I'll take it. Bismillah. Right? Now, auntie, if she stopped, like the meat is right there, she effectively, it's a restricted jahala. Why? Because in dealing, she knows how much that kind of wheat is. People can wing it. It doesn't reasonably lead to dispute. But certainly, of course, the caution is to define things first. Just take a moment, weigh it, agree on the price before the contract, right? But if they agree to the sale before, what's the consequence of the issue? If they agree to the sale before, then they weigh it afterwards and then just part, the sale was binding. And that's the fatwa position, right? So auntie buys it. So the fatwa position, auntie buys that pile of meat. Then Khan Sahab, Uncle Khan, which she calls Khan Sahab because they're similar age, he weighs it, goes, that will be $74.35. Oh, too much? Bay'a fasid. No, fatwa would be, it's binding. Right? Or let's say Sister Sadia comes, she studied fiqh, says, Uncle Khan, by the way, that sale was corrupt. Mantu auntie only gets 1 kilo. I'll buy the rest for this much. You can't do that. That would be considered a binding sale. And so it has implications. Why? Because that's why urf is important, right? Urf is important. So in both scenarios, where there's a bunch of things, whether they're non-variable in units, like rice, wheat, eggs, or variable in their unit quality price, in both cases, it would be valid. Right? Other scenarios. Let's say, one of the brothers runs a wholesale. They buy and sell used computers. So they go to an office. Says, how much will you sell me these desktops for? And they're all functioning, used. So I'll sell you each one for $100. He doesn't count them. Says, I'll take it. Says, then they'll count it, and that much is due. The fatwa position is that sale is valid and binding on both parties. Right? That sale is valid and binding on both parties. Right? Because these are customarily transacted in. Right? These are transactions that are customarily made. Right? And they don't lead to dispute. But certainly the better thing to do, right? And we always try to do what's better is to say, okay, to agree in principle and then make the transaction once you've defined things. And that avoids chitter chatter and dispute, right? That avoids chitter chatter and dispute, right? Because they say, كل ما كان أدفع للنزاع فهو أحسن شرعا. All that is further from dispute is superior, Sharia-wise. Okay. Now, something that frequently happens is, let's say, people agreed to buy something, right? On condition of weight, or condition of volume, or condition of length, like in cloth, for example. And it turns out to be more or less. Right? So before we look at the specific, there's one basic principle. Now this is referring to, there's two scenarios, right? One is, the basis is that weight and volume are considered to be an asl, a basis for something sold by weight or volume. Right? But what is sold by weight and volume is when in the transaction, and if you think of a classical marketplace, the reason I'm breaking it down, because this would be different from many things where the weight or volume is mentioned in our times, right? The example would be, let's say, you go to, someone goes to Jalalabad, right? And they want to buy some apples, right? Or any marketplace anywhere in a traditional marketplace. Do they normally put apples in Jalalabad in plastic bags, with labels and stuff, and you pick up a bag that says 5 kilo? I'm sure there's supermarkets that do that, but generally what do? You go and you say, I would like 3 kilos of these apples. And they weigh 3 kilos for you, right? Right? So it being 3 kilos is a condition, right? And it's a basis, right? It's being sold, right? 1 kilo is this much, 2 kilos is this much, 3 kilos is this much. Or something, that's called wazn, right? By weight. Kail is volume, right? Liters, milk, sold by the liter, right? But there's a difference between something where you have, you go to the milk shop and you say, how much is your buffalo milk? Say, well, the raw organic buffalo milk is $2 a liter, whatever the price may be. As for the hormonized mad cows, it's 50 cents a liter. I'll take the hormonized mad cows. Okay. So you get 10 liters for $5, right? But what if you got 10 liters, but then you weighed it and it's less, it's more? So when it comes to weight, wazn, and kale, and volume, on that which is sold on condition of weight and volume, right, the amount is an asl. The amount is an asl. But in things sold by measure, generally the measure is an attribute. Generally, it's a wasf, right? Because let's say you buy, you are buying office space, right? Now, some places it's very objective, right? It's become very objective, right? I asked when we moved into the new Seekers Guidance Center, there's a brother at Cooper's who's, he asked, where do you guys move into? I said, such and such place. He said, what's the square footage? I told him how the square footage. You're paying about this much in rent? I said, yes. I said, that's about right. I said, how do you know? I said, because we rented down the road. He said, yeah, but you probably shouldn't be telling people that because our community doesn't understand how expensive rent is. I said, we don't hide it, but yeah, you have to, people have outdated notions. But, sometimes but in general, if you're if you're buying a flat, right, a 1,700, a flat that is, let's just say they've stopped building rooms in flats. So, and flats are unique. Now it's a little bit different. But the 1,700, let's say the flat, and it's just sold by width. So the flat that is 20 meters wide, they say this flat, its width is 20 meters. Another flat whose width is 24 meters. The asl is that the dhira, right, the measure, the length is a descriptor, right? So it relates to the value, but it's not an asl. It's not an asl. That and that applies to cloth, right? To unique cloth, as for example, and other things that are sold by measure that are not just unitary items, right? Like the unique cloth, or a carpet, right? A carpet. Let's say I sell a 10-foot carpet for $100, would we assume that a 12-foot carpet would be $120? Not necessarily. Why? Because the length is assumed to be, right? They say al-asl is that that the dhira, like the length, is a wasf, is a descriptor in the sale. It's an attribute of the sale. وَالْأَوْصَافِ لَا يُقَابِلُهَا شَيْءٌ مِّنَ الثَّمَنِ. And the qualities of a sale, they do not relate directly to the price, right? Because they're not objective, right? Right? It's like, if you said, if someone purchased meat and they said this is premium grade A meat, with lots of fat. You got there and it doesn't have enough fat. You say, it didn't have enough fat, so therefore I'm going to pay you $2 less per kilo. You can't do that. Because even though having a lot of fat is an attribute, but the price does not relate objectively. And but what we mean by objectively is that there's no direct relationship between that quality and how much of it there is and the price. Because otherwise, you'd have chaos and dispute. Because people differ in how they value quality. And that's the basis of things sold by length. And these are things that differ. And carpets, like handmade carpets, each unit differs. So just because it's bigger, other considerations come in. As opposed to things like rolls of carpets, etc., they would be considered could be different. So taking that into mind, let's see what the author says. He says, فَلَوْ نَقَصَ كَيْلٌ أَخَذَ بِحِصَّتِهِ أَوْ فَسَخ. So, of course, he leaves something out, which is, if something is sold on condition of volume, and then the volume isn't full, then the buyer takes the item for its share of the price, or he can cancel. So, something by volume, right? That Yahya goes to Jalalabad. She wants to buy some milk. So she goes, gets some buffalo milk, gets 10 liters of milk for, she thinks she's smart, she pays in American dollars, she gives it in 10 American dollars. When it's measured, turns out to be 9 liters. Right? So sold by volume, there the relationship between the unit price, right? So if you sell 10 liters for $10, if it turns out to be 9 liters, then what's due? Very simple, $9. Because in things sold by weight and volume, the relationship between price and unit is considered objective. But, so the buyer takes the item with his share of the price, or they can cancel. Why can they cancel? Same reason, لِتَفْرِيقِ الصَّفْقَةِ, because you wanted 10 liters. Right? You wanted to make some, you don't have to explain why you want to cancel. You wanted 10 liters, you got 9, you can take it for its share of the price, or you can cancel. It's called لِتَفْرِيقِ الصَّفْقَةِ, because that the agreed upon thing in the sale was not fulfilled for you. But what if it's more? Right? If it's more, right? وَإِنْ زَادَ فَلِلْبَائِعِ. If it ends up being more, the extra belongs to the seller, because what was sold was, so here, the relationship between amount and price is an asl. You got, and it was sold on condition of weight. So even though it said, this is 10 kilos or 10 liters of milk, you bought it, I want 10 liters of milk, right? So you are buying 10 liters of milk, right? Because it's on condition of being 10 liters. So if it's more than that, it belongs to the buyer. Now here it's very important, and people make mistakes with this all the time. Things sold by weight and volume, it is wajib, shar'an, for it to be weighed either at the time of the transaction or before they part. And people make it's not permitted to say, yeah, I'll weigh it at home. Because it leads to dispute. It leads to dispute. It's wajib, it's sinful, even if they don't end up differing. If it's sold on condition of weight, it has to be weighed either at the time of transaction or after the transaction before they part. This can inevitably lead to dispute. So it's sinful, even if it doesn't lead to dispute. Okay, so that's the first scenario. And then وَلَوْ نَقَصَ ذِرَاعٌ أَخَذَ بِكُلِّ ثَمَنْ أَوْ تَرَكْ. If the length is short, meaning if something is sold on condition of length, and this is where the units vary, right? This is like, let's say the hand-woven carpet, for example. Right? So we say, I sell you this carpet for $500 on condition, on condition that it is 5 meters. Turns out to be 4.5 meters. Right? Here, in things sold by length, the default assumption is that the length is a quality of the sale, not a basis of the sale. Okay? The price is not ascribed to it objectively. Therefore, you either accept, the buyer says, it's short, I accept it. So you take it for the full price, or you can leave it because you didn't get what was agreed upon. Right? If more, right? But turns out that the carpet is 6 meters. It belongs to the buyer. Right? وَإِنْ زَادَ فَلِلْمُشْتَرِي. Why? Because it's a quality. It's not an asl. Now, and there's no option of cancellation for the seller. This is the general case. But there's an important underlying legal principle, which is لا عبرة بالخطأ البين خطأه. This is one of the قواعد الفقهية. لا عبرة بالخطأ البين خطأه. There is no consideration for an error that is evidently an error. Right? So let's say, inshallah, I have to label or put some kind of thing. I keep losing my wireless headphones. Let's say I have these really good quality headphones, right? Everybody knows. And they're reasonably new. So I say, how much will you sell me these for? So I say, I'll sell you these headphones for 50 cents. And I'm not, and I'm selling it at a store. Person puts 50 cents, say, khalas, said, I accept. Do good quality wireless headphones sell for 50 cents? See, Abdul Latif, A or nay?
No.
Never. I asked 10 people, would you believe that, we're not into smuggling or anything like that this would have been sold for that? Say no, right? So similarly, if, so this is in the normal kind of transaction. Someone sold someone a 2-meter carpet. And the guy at the store gave them a 20-meter carpet. That's not what enters here. Why? Because that's, the legal principle applies. لا عبرة بالخطأ البين خطأ. There's no consideration for error that is evident. Because we know the principle that وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah has not placed hardship for you in religion, and this would be hardship because the person would stand to lose a lot of money. And many other evidentiary bases. Okay, so that's the issue of length. But the slightly distinct scenario, which is, however, right? He says, وَلَوْ قَالَ كُلُّ ذِرَاعٍ بِكَذَا وَنَقَصَ ذِرَاعٌ أَخَذَ بِحِصَّتِهِ أَوْ تَرَكَ. However, if something is sold by length, so let's use the example of the carpet. So I sell you this carpet, given that it is 5 meters. Each meter is $100. So therefore, it is a $500 carpet. In this case, right? However, if he says every cubit, or let's say, every measure, every cubit measure of length, let's say every meter, let's say, but every cubit is for such amount, then if it is short, he takes it for its share of the price. Because even though the measure, like the length is a wasf, right? Is a quality. And the basis is that the length of variable things like variable things, unique things like carpets or individual items of cloth, right? Hand-weaved, unique pieces of cloth. But let's use a simple example of handmade, unique carpets. But when we say each meter is such and such, then it resembles an asl, a basis for the price. So if it ends up being shorter, the buyer takes it for its share of the price or leaves it. Why? Because they wanted a 5-meter carpet for their living room. It's 4.5 meters. It's not big enough. So he can leave it. Of course, leave it meaning tarak fasakh al-bay'. He can cancel the sale. He has the right to do so. وَإِن زاد, and if it's more than that, right? So he said, I sell you this carpet on condition that it is 5 meters, each meter is $100, and ends up being 6 meters long. What happens if more? He takes the whole thing, each cubit for the agreed upon price. So let's say 6 meters, $600. Or he can cancel, because I didn't want the bigger carpet, I didn't want to pay more. So he has the option of cancellation. Again, these things can become like a jamboree of issues in your head. You can diagram it very clearly. Right? And inshallah, we'll be expediting uploading the slides today. So you can see differences in volume, 2 cases, less or more. Differences in length, less and more. But in both of these, and then difference in length on condition that each cubit is for such and such, in the case of the less, in the case of the more, and we explained it out. Any questions here?
I have a question. This is for the issue. ولو نقص ذراع أخذ بكل الثمن وترك وإن زالت للمشتري.
Okay, what's the question?
Does the mushtari have a khiyar here? For example, if someone buys a shirt and it's 2 sizes too big, can we return it?
Oh, that's a separate issue. That has nothing to do with this whatsoever. Right? That is, so if you buy something that, let's say sizes are objective. Now in our times, that's, we think we've solved everything, but we haven't. Right? Like if you buy clothing, etc., you realize that sizes and stuff aren't really properly standardized. But if you buy something on condition that the shoe is size 9.5, turns out it's 10.5, right? That's a separate issue. That's a separate issue. That's called, so it was specified as one way, it was different. That's one of the khiyarat, the option of cancellation, right? And that is, or you bought a cap on condition that it's 2XL, turns out to be medium, right? That is a type of option of cancellation. It's called khiyaru fawati wasfin marghub. The option of cancellation for a desired quality being absent. And that's actually one of the rare issues where Ibn Abdin verifies something and he kind of his verification was not quite verifiable. And we'll point towards that in its due place. This discussion that we just took, right? I would try to diagram it yourself as well. And accessing the translation, inshallah, will help you with that. Review your notes from the class. Looking at the diagram yourself, but to appreciate the reasons, you would benefit, inshallah. Then, there's a couple of addendum issues that don't require as now. One important matter, right, that we mentioned. Let's say you buy. Now just leave the fiqh aside a second. Let's use a little bit of common thinking, right? That because fiqh is not fiction, right? It describes human actions. Let's say that you went to buy some premium chocolate, right? So you went to QDS, Qadiri's Delightful Sweets, Quds, right? Qadiri's Delightful Sweets. So they're selling a box of chocolates, handmade chocolates with some ethnic twist to it. They have saffron syrup in it or something crazy. So it says it's 500 grams. So there's a box. It says 500 grams. You went to the counter. The owner of Qadri Delightful Sweets says that's $55. You bought it. Do you have to weigh that box? Do you have to weigh that box? Oh, everybody buys and sells, right? The auntie at the counter will say, "Leave it, next customer." Right? So you guys got to decide. Do you have to weigh that box? It says 500.
You should.
Well, forget you should. You should do all kinds of good things, right? Do you have to? What if auntie says, "Beta, no measuring here." So, Sidi Abdul Latif brings out his weighing scale because he makes coffee. And you cannot make good coffee typically without a proper weighing scale. So he measures it, turns out to be 475 grams. Can he say, "I will only pay 475 grams over 500 grams, I'll pay"? It turns out to be 450 grams, 90% of what's on the box. Does he have the right to only pay partially? practically, could you do that in a store?
No.
No, because there's a difference between something being sold on condition of weight or on condition of volume, and where weight or volume is mentioned as an attribute. So let's say you go buy cereal, right? One of the biggest commercial scams in the world, right? So you went and bought some Raisin Bran. It says, well, with these big fat boxes, 1 kilogram. But see, the Abdul Latif decides to go, let me measure it. So he puts his scale, he purchases it, and at the counter he measures it and says, Brother Zafar, give me back $10. You sold it, I got this 1 kilogram of premium Raisin Bran for $10. I just weighed it, it's 900 grams. Give me $1 back. Can you do that? No, because in these kinds of sales, the weight is not a condition for the sale. It is an attribute of the sale. Right? And most things that are sold in the supermarket, right, in the grocery store, they're sold by that defined unit. The weight is a quality that if it is significantly variant, you could have the option of cancellation, but you can't, one of the big scams they do in selling you drinks is, they give you these fancy shapes, and you can see that, they put this latte, it looks huge, but the top little tier, because it's so much wider, you think you're getting a full mug, but they got this fancy wide mug. You're being cheated, right? And you can, if you knew a little bit of whatever however you calculate volume, whatever science requires that. If you remember volume, right? The top little bit is as big as the rest. Anyways, so let's say you bought, a mug of coffee, and it says, latte, and they describe it, 478 milliliters. So you purchase the latte. See, the Latif brings out his scale, puts it, and he says, it's only 425 milliliters. Could you ask Qadri Delightful Sweets that, excuse me, I calculated, you sold me a mug of hot chocolate. It says there 478 milliliters. I got 450 milliliters. I'd like 73 cents back. Can you do that? Can you do that? No. Why? Because though the weight or measure is mentioned there, it's not being sold on condition of its weight or measure. The weight or measure is here a wasf. It is a quality, right? Now, some quality, if it is a significant quality, it would give you the right of cancellation, right? So most things you buy in the in the grocery store are typically sold by unit. Things that are bagged, packaged, etc. But if you ask for 2 kilos of apples and they weigh them for you, that's on condition, right? And that, for people who trade and so on, they need to understand the distinction between those two things, right? if you buy oud, right? And it's important to understand these. There's no point in just plowing through the text, but to understand this, right? Let's say that Sidi Abdul Latif. Have you ever sold oud, Sidi, or perfume? Someone I know you sell it.
No.
Okay, good. Losing business, Sidi. Trust me. I see. But let's say Sidi Abdul Latif goes in oud business. And he's very careful, right? But he sells bottles, and it says 10 milliliters. But he's selling the bottle for $100. What is he selling? The bottle. It's not on condition it being $10, 10 milliliters, but the 10 milliliters is an attribute. If it ends up being slightly less, you cannot demand a reduction in the price, etc. Now, if it's significantly less, the buyer would have the option of cancellation, right? That's a different thing. But if someone goes to you, and let's say he's a wholesaler in perfumes, says, give me 10 milliliters of your royal jasmine. So he pours it. This is now on condition of weight. In situations like this, it needs to be measured. If it is shipped to the person, you should measure it before you use it. If it's done, or, and there's details of fiqh related to that. If people engage in transactions, they should go through the specifics of what they engage in. And the wisdom of this is what? Is to avoid dispute. Right? To avoid dispute. And that's why, and in general, the Prophet ﷺ said, 2 characteristics for blessed transactions, right? That the two transacting part, either sadaqah wa nasaha. If they are true in their words and their actions, so they don't try to lie, cheat, or deceive, that's obligatory. So either sadaqah, meaning that they don't lie, they don't cheat, they don't deceive, wa nasaha, and they have nasiha for each other. They keep in mind, of course, you're a fool if you don't take care of your own interest. If you don't take care of it, who will take care of it for you, right? But you have nasiha. You keep in mind the good, the interest of the other party. Have nasiha. You want good for the other party. بُورِكَ لَهُمَا فِي بَيْعِهِمَا. Then their transaction will be blessed. Allah will put the secret of increase in it. Okay. So that's an important distinction, and it applies frequently in our time, so people get confused. Right? But it's just good to be clear. Sometimes things are a little bit tricky. If you think about a baqla, like if you think about an Arab sweet shop, and you think about examples of this yourself. If you think about an Arab sweet shop, there are things that are sold by unit. Like frequently things like, qataif and this and that. There's certain things sold by unit. Other things are sold by weight. Sometimes it's tricky, right? It's tricky. And these things do lead to dispute. I've seen fights break out in Amman over kunafa. Why? Because they sell it by weight, but individual pieces are sold for a known amount. They cut, they give it to you on the plate. Now they tell you it's ruba kilo, it's a quarter kilo. But technically nobody's weighing it. They go, there, it used to trouble me. Why? Because if you're saying that it's ruba kilo, you're not weighing it. But there they're selling you a plate of kunafa. So that is, there in individual units, what is the weight there? Simply a descriptor. But in large amounts, the weight is a basis for it, right? That you order a family, and the reason being that some sellers, what they'll do, that they say, okay, we want 5 kilos of kunafa for home. So what happens? They cut 20 pieces, because they say each individual piece is quarter kilo. 20 pieces, they take it. Now the guy goes home, and then there are like, and Khalto decided to weigh it, said this is 4 kilos. Right? So things like this, and it leads to dispute. Right? And I've been stuck in line after dinner trying to get some kunafa, and somebody's fighting that it wasn't, There's practical caution that if you're selling things by weight, be clear, are you selling it by piece or by weight? Because it can lead to dispute. If it is being sold on condition of weight, it must be weighed in the presence of the buyer, or before they part, they have to weigh it. Any questions here?
I have a question.
Yes?
So this is my first question. I'll take away the problematic example. Does the buyer have an option to cancel if the length of garment is longer than the agreed upon length, and the buyer doesn't want to take it back? So, for example, if somebody had, they wanted to buy a 10-foot carpet for their living room, the buyer gave them a 15-foot carpet. The seller gave this that to them. The buyer doesn't want to keep it because it's too big, and the seller doesn't want to keep it either because they're happy to get rid of the warehouse space. So in that case, here in the Mexican only says the Nafia and the Day, it doesn't say anything about the Mishnah. So does the Mishnah really have a PR here?
That's a good question. It needs thinking through. That needs thinking through. We could post the question and mull over it. I'm sure it's discussed. We'll take a couple of issues to close out. He says, وَفَسَدَ بَيْعُ عَشْرَةِ أَذْرُعٍ مِنْ دَارٍ. It is corrupt, fasid, voidable, to sell a number of cubits of a property. Right? This is a number of unspecified cubits. Because if you specify them, then I'll sell you 10 meters on this side. Because then it's known. Right? Because it would lead to dispute. It would lead to dispute. Which 10 cubits? La ashum. It isn't corrupt to sell a share of it. I'll sell you 10% of this house. That's valid. Right? Because because you own 10% of the whole thing. But 10 square feet of this house, which 10 square feet? Right? Would lead to dispute. وَإِنِ اشْتَرَى, and then we'll take the rest of the issues. So this is the issue that we wanted to put. وَإِنِ اشْتَرَى عِدْلًا على أنه 10 أثواب فنقص أو زاد فسد. If one sells a bundle of cloth on condition that it is 10 items, right? And as we said, cloth, whether these are unique pieces of cloth or items of clothing, that there's 10 units of variable clothing, right? Which is either different pieces of cloth, each one different, or 10 different thobes, or 10 different jilbabs, or 10 different whatever, then if it's less or more, it's corrupt. Why? Because each one is has a unique price and value, and it would just lead to dispute. However, if they specified, but he says, وَلَوْ بَيَّنَ لِكُلِّ ثَوْبٍ ثَمَنًا وَنَقَصَ صَحَّ بِقَدْرِهِ وَخُيِّرٍ. However, if they specified a price for each item, and then it's less. So I said, in this bag is this, 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 and this. And not everything is present. and there's a price for each one, then he can accept that, yeah, I don't care about the handmade socks. Didn't want them anyways. So there, if it's less, it is valid for its extent of the price, the schedule of price defined. But the buyer has the option of canceling. Say, well, what I wanted was the socks. I didn't get everything I wanted. If someone wanted a whole set of garments, but the waistcoat is missing. No, the waistcoat was really important to me, right? وَإِنْ زَادَ فَسَدْ. But there is more, then this transaction is corrupt. Because then you'd be, if it was binding, then you'd be bound to something that you hadn't agreed to. But they can rectify it, right? They can say, oh, there was more, let's agree on the price. They agree, then it's validated, right? ومن اشترى ثوبا على أنه 10 أذرع كل ذراع بدرهم أخذه ب10 في 10.5 بلا خيار وب9 في 9.5 بخيار. If someone buys cloth on condition that it is 10 cubits, each cubit for a dirham, right? The buyer takes it for 10, if 10.5, without option of cancellation. Why? Because the price is considered to be ultimate. The measure is ultimately a quality, right? And if it's slightly more, but diyanatan, religiously, you should pay the exact price, diyanatan. But in court, could be, this. So what we customarily consider slight variance, he's not expected to pay the extra. And what's significantly less, he only has to pay that lesser amount for. So it's rounded down, right? It's rounded down. So, and for 9, if 9 and a bit, I should say and a bit, not and a habit, he only has to pay, if it's 9.5, he only has to pay $9, but with the option of cancellation because you didn't get what you were seeking, right? So you can think about the example of the carpet, for example. But diyanatan, religiously, what would be superior would be, to pay the exact amount, right? That would be religiously superior. But certainly in court, it's hard to, enforce, right? Because frequently things sold by length, a slight variance is inevitable. But this is also predicated on the fact that classically, you have to keep in mind that practically there were 3 currencies that were at the base, at the minimum, running at the same time. What would be the 3 currencies? You'd have a gold currency, a silver currency, and the base metal currency, dinars, dirhams, and fulus. And they had typically varying exchange rates between them, right? So if you bought something for 9 dirham, it would be difficult to say 9 dirham, to enforce the little extra, like you couldn't do 9.25 dirhams, right? Because these are a dinar is a unitary gold coin, a dirham is a unitary silver coin. So the extra, it could lead to dispute, and in trade could cause awkwardness. But in our times, this would be much more easily solvable because you pay, it's easy to ascribe. We have singular currencies. So this issue, the fatwa would be that you pay the amount that is due. But if significant, if not significant, right, the slight variance, the price would not relate to it, because ultimately in items sold by length, sold with the description of the length, the price does not relate directly to the length, right? Like the example of being hand-woven carpets, right? So the carpet happens to be 5.25 meters. The seller cannot demand that you have to pay me $525. $500 would be due. But if it's significantly shorter, then the lesser amount would be due. Right? It's helpful here, before we close, to train yourself mentally by each of these. Think of as many scenarios as you can, simple scenarios. Don't complicate it, right? So you can get a hang of it. And if you can make them specific, don't just think someone sold something to someone. Make and you don't have to come up with a very fancy story, right? But you define it clearly, to yourself. It'll be much, much easier to understand these issues. And then if you have any questions, we're here to assist and serve bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Okay, any directly related questions, inshallah? So just because today's lesson has a number of things that people sometimes get confused with, inshallah, we'll be expediting sending you the slides for this, bi'idhnillah, and you can access them within the next 12 hours, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Wa barakallahu ta'ala fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes?
Yes, I have one more question. What kinds of OSAF can be made scalable with the price, as we saw for cloth, or what are the conditions for what to be made validly scalable? So some examples, what if in a market, cattle is customarily purchased at a known ratio of age and weight? So in that case...
That's too subjective. No, it would be length. Length, the initial assumption is length on things that vary. Your length is a wasf, but where you give a unit price for each unit of length, then it becomes a wasf that resembles an asl. Here, the summary of the issues related to this point, we can share, and if you guys would like to collaborate on this, the Toronto bunch, you can find it in Imam Haskafi's sharh on the on Multaq al-Abhur. Right, the opening on this section, you can find the discussion. You could even translate it into English, because he gives a few really nice principles, and it's actually expressed more clearly there than it is in the Durr al-Mukhtar or almost anywhere else. The same thing is discussed in many other texts, but we could share those pages from Majma' al-Anhur, from Majma' al-Anhur with Haskafi in the background. But you guys could translate that, and and once I approve it, we could append it to the sections. It's a very useful thing. He mentions a number of related principles. But other things you can't, because then, like say, like cattle age and this and this and this, that becomes too subjective, right? And it leads to dispute. The asl is that as the unit increases, the price increases, right? The most criteria for like animals and stuff are not that objective, right? Unless it becomes a urf thabit, then that becomes a fatwa issue. That is this urf actually thabit? And that's very hard to establish, right? Okay. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Is not coming from here? It's in hospital. What happened? Going to the States, you won't have. Yes, over.